This shir is the 8th shir in the series of Yemois HaMoshiach, and it's dedicated Le'ilui Nishmas Ha'isha Hindel Bas HaChove Yisroel Hilda Simon Aleh HaShalom, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and she was nifter on the 27th of Teves 3 years ago. This is her 3rd yortzeit. It's dedicated and sponsored by Denny and Chaya Simon and the families of Dr. Elio and Shuli German, Noach and Miriam Magedman, and Danny and Gitti Greenfield of Ramat Bet Shemesh. Le'ilui Nishmoso v'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchoso. This shir will explore and investigate and, I hope, enlighten in Perek 142, Kuf Mem Beis of Tehillim. But before we go into it and explain why it's relevant and important during the times of Iktus and Mashiach, I think it's worthwhile spending a few minutes, a little bit of history, giving the background, the setting in which this Perek was said, and then we can appreciate what Dovid Hamelech was actually saying and what he was going through in his lifetime. If you remember, in the beginning of Shmuel Aleph, or rather in the middle, around Perek Yud Ches and Kof, Dovid was supposed to turn up at a Rosh Chodesh banquet, which Shaul was making, but he was scared for his life. He realized that Shaul had wanted to kill him, so Yonasan, his close friend, the son of Shaul, decided that he would go in and then send a message to Dovid to what the mood of his father, if he still wanted to kill him or not. Yonasan went in, and Shaul was angry about the friendship of Dovid and Yonasan, and immediately Yonasan came out into the field, and he had made an arrangement with Dovid that he would shoot 3 arrows. If the arrows were in front of the rock, then it meant that Dovid can return to Yerushalayim. But if they were beyond the rock, it meant he had to flee and run away. And he shot the arrows beyond the rock, and it was a sign for Dovid that he should run away, and he fled to the place called Noiv Ir HaKohanim, a city of Kohanim. However, Yonasan had made a mistake, that when Dovid fled, he forgot to give him tzed al haderech, food on the way. And Dovid was in a situation of bulmus, which is almost dying of starvation. And he went into the city of the Kohanim, and there he ate from the lechem haponim. In reality, he wasn't a kohen, and he wasn't entitled to eat it, but in a mokum of pikuach nefesh, that he was almost about to die, he had no choice, but he had to eat it. There in the city was Doeg, who was the Av Beis Din, who reported back to Shaul that Dovid was there, and therefore Dovid had to flee. And he went on his first stop of many different places of refuge, and he went to a place called Gat. Gat was by the Plishtim on the coast near Gaza, and there he hid for a while until people in the city told Achish, the king of Gat, that this was the person who killed our great warrior Goliath, and Dovid was in mortal danger. He decided that he would act like a Meshuggah. He dribbled from the mouth and he wrote on the wall, and it so happened that Achish had a wife and a daughter who also Meshuggah. He said, Chasa Meshuggahim ani, do I need any more Meshuggahs? And he sent him away, and that is how he actually escaped. He then went to a place called Ma'oras Adulam, which are the caves by the Dead Sea, and there he looked after, like a father figure, to 400 Matzukei Leiv, 400 broken people who had no happiness in their life, no nachas, Balei Choivos, people who had hard lives, and he was a father to them. But then he couldn't stay, and he fled and took his parents to a place called Mitzpeh Moab on the other side of the Jordan, hoping that they would be safe. And the king of Moab eventually deceived him and killed his family, but he managed to escape. He then went to a place called Keilah, where he saved them, and then they betrayed him to Shaul, and he had to flee from there And he went on to a place called Midbar Tzin, which was a wilderness where the only way I can possibly explain to you, it was something like a cat and mouse. Dovid was on one side of the mountain, and Shaul was on the other with 3,000 soldiers pursuing him, and he was in mortal danger. He fled and went to a place called Ya'ar Cheres, which translated means the forest of clay. Nothing grows in clay. There was no vegetation. He had no protection and no food. And Dovid found him, but remarkably that's where we have the famous perek of Mizmor LeDovid Hashem Roi Lo Yechsa B'Nosdeshi Yal B'Tzeini, a beautiful perek of bitochen and trust. Yam Ki Elech B'Geitza Moves Lo Ira Ro. Eventually he fled to the Dead Sea and went in one of the caves at Ein Gedi. And this is where this perek comes alive. Maskil LeDovid B'Hiyosa Bam'ora Tefillah. Dovid realized when he was in the back of the cave that in reality nothing really helps a person in his life but the koyach of Tefillah. What happened was that Shaul, who was searching for him, came into the cave to relieve himself. And as soon as Dovid had gone in, however, a spider made a web and therefore partitioned him from Shaul, and the guards of Shaul never looked to see further, because obviously if there's a spider's web, there can't be anybody behind it. At one point in his life, Dovid had asked Ribbono Shel Olam, two things I don't understand: why you made meshugoyim and why you made creepy crawlies, why you made spiders. What's the point of them? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you'll see, the time will come that your life will be spared because of the two, and everything has a purpose in life. But that being said, this particular perek is really a golden anthology of who we're dealing with here. Maybe we can explain with a beautiful pasuk in Tehillim, Matzreif lakesef v'kur lezor v'vish lefi mahalaloi. Says the pasuk in Mishlei, if you want to get pure silver, then you need to refine it and remove the impurities. Similarly with gold, you put it in a furnace. The ish, if you want to find out what is pure man, what he is made of, ish lefi mahalaloi, what he says. And Dovid in the cave made these 8 psukim of prayer, remarkably at a time of such enormous anxiety and mortal danger, but we have one of the most famous prayers of Dovid Hamelech, almost like a formula of the points to consider of tefillah, which are so important. It is important to recognize, however, what's behind this perek. Several prokim in Tehillim were the heartbeat of Dovid at a certain time in his life and the pulse of what he was going through, but at the same time they're prophecies of what Klal Yisroel will encompass in the period of Golus. And that's the meaning perhaps of the word of a maskil. Dovid, in the words of the Gaon in Mishlei, maskil means a person who is successfully thought out, that he was correct in his thinking. Dovid reacted and composed certain words when he was going through a certain difficulty, and they also serve as a prophecy of what Klal Yisroel will go through in the future years. For example, we have that perek Yud Gimel is referred Ad Ona Hashem Tishkacheni Netzach. 4 times Ad Ona refers to the 4 periods of Golus. Perek Kof Beis is Ayeles HaShachar, which refers to the history of Purim. And the Siporno explains that this perek Kuf Mem Beis, is the pulse and the feelings of Klal Yisroel just before the Moshiach arrives. The feelings of Ikvasa de Mashiach, what Klal Yisroel will go through, and what Dovid felt in the cave is the response in prayer that Klal Yisroel are supposed to be aroused to during the times of Ikvasa de Mashiach. And that's probably the reason why we continually say this perek over and over again in these times of great difficulty in the Moshe HaMashiach. And that's the reason why I chose this perek to learn through. Because you you see not only from the history of David, but as we mentioned, it's a prophecy of what Klal Yisroel will feel and how they will respond in prayer to the times of Ikvus Mashiach. And that's why it says, B'hi Yosai Bam Ora Tfilah. The Medrash Sheikhatoiv explains on this pasuk, Migdal Ois Shem Hashem, Bo Yorutz Tzadik V'Niskov. Pasuk from Mishlei Pevit Yud Ches, when Shlomo Hamelech says, Migdal Ois Shem Hashem, Tefillah is like a tower of strength. Bo Yorutz Tzadik V'Niskov. That's where a tzaddik runs to and is uplifted. Meaning, the power of prayer that David was aroused to say when he was in this enormous difficulty, in the mamash, about to face death in the cave with all 3,000 soldiers outside, is the feeling of Klal Yisroel before the Moshiach. And that's the important point. The arousal of prayer, the ability to come forward and respond in a specific way, is the lesson of the maskil of David in the cave while he was being pursued, and it's a lesson for Klal Yisrael before the times of the Moshiach. The first, let's start from Pasuk Beis. Koili el Hashem ezok, Koili el Hashem eschanon. My voice is to Hashem and I called out. My voice is to Hashem and I begged for chanun, for grace, for compassion. This pasuk, in its very simple meaning, in the literal meaning, one might say in English, is hitting the bullseye, straight to the point. My voice is to Hashem. Literally, the word koil, the Vilna Gaon explains in the words in the bracha Shema Koilenu, in the bracha in Shemona Esrei, koil is not even an amira or a dibur. Koil is a squeal, a squeak, a shriek of fear. Koili, let that alone, that goes without an amir. The fact that I turned to Hashem, El Hashem ezok, I cried out. There's an enormous lesson in this sentence which we can learn as a rule, as a formula in prayer. Prayer needs to be focused. Prayer needs to be targeted. You're talking to the Almighty, and as a result the prayer needs to be without distraction, without any deviation. It must go straight to the kisei. That's what David is doing here. Koili el Hashem ezok. We learn in Pashas Vayechi, when Yaakov gave the city of Shechem to Yosef, he said, I acquired it becharbi ubekashti, with my sword and with my bow. The Targum explains it to be b'tzlausi ubausi, with my prayer and my request. The Mefarshim ask, since when does that mean my sword and my bow? One is prayer and one is physical action taken in battle. The answer is that prayer must be like a sword to the target, or an arrow to the target, hitting straight, making sure you get straight to the point. That's the power of prayer. And therefore perhaps we can learn an important principle that it's not really dependent on a matter of time. Time is an advantage, is an asset, if it's useful. But the real essence of prayer is the focus. If it takes you longer, then daven as long as you want. But it's not necessary. That's secondary. Primary is the focus. Koili el Hashem, what David is doing here is, straight away he got to the point. He was in the cave. Shaul was right in front of him. The spider's web was protecting him. And Shaul had 3,000 soldiers outside. And here was this man. And in reality, the tables had turned. Shaul was really at the mercy of David, because he'd have killed him any second. And that's what the maskil refers to, that David rationalized and realized that in the end of the day, it's not the soldiers and all the king's horses and all the king's men who saves a person. In reality, it's a person's prayer. And that's what he did. Koili el Hashem, direct and focused. There's a beautiful expression which the Chavetz Chaim brings down in Siman Tzadik Ches, Sif Ches in the Mishnah Berurah in Oirach Chaim, that when a person comes to daven, she'ein b'yad shum malach oy koichav or mazel lemalos she'elosa ikiim b'rutzoynoi yisborach. That when a person comes to pray, it won't help all the connections or stars or astrology or rich Uncle Charlie, or I have connections in America, I know the mayor, I have a good lawyer. No. When it comes to prayer, ki im b'rutzoynoi yisborach, the power of complete focus, of clearly recognizing who I'm talking to, and not to be disturbed by money or protexia or yichus or so-called security or factors which people sometimes use as a pillow, as a support, but in reality they're not. And that's what Dovid is saying here. There is a famous perush on Tehillim by the Maharitz, Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Dushinsky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who was the Gaived in Yerushalayim. I remember years ago I was asked to say a series of shiurim, each week saying a perek of Tehillim, and I looked around for Sforim which to use, and I went into a bookstore on Meir Shorim and asked the man in the counter, tell me a good perush on Tehillim. So he said to me, lift your right hand. My hand was on the Sforim. He said, underneath your hand is one of the best meforshim. That was the Maharitz on Tehillim, a beautiful perush. Several weeks later, the shopkeeper was blown up on the number 2 bus next to the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim years ago. I remember Reb Shmuel Volner, Hashem Yimkom Damai. He was the one who told me to look at this perush. And the Maharitz says as follows. Dovid is asking 2 things. Koili el Hashem ezok. A zo'oka is a taina in din. I am legitimately correct in my claim. I am being pursued, and he's trying to kill me, but I've done nothing to Shaul. I don't deserve this. So I have a complaint in judgment. I'm correct in my plea. That's a zo'oko. Eschanon is a matnas chinan. Eschanan, Moshe Rabbeinu tzadikim ask without relying on their merit, without relying on their righteousness or any plea. Eschanan is, I ask Hashem for compassion, for mercy, that he'll help me. That's the first pasuk. Pasuk Gimel. Eshpoich lefonov sichi. Tzorosi lefonov agid. I will pour out in front of you sichi, my conversation. Tzorosi, my troubles, I will tell you. There is a particular focus in this sentence which we must look at and pick up as a formula in prayer. Let's take the last first. Agid is different from the word sipur. The Malbim in Perek Yud Tes in Tehillim, Hashomayim Mesaprim Kavoid Kael, Umase Yodov Magid Horakia. There are 2 words used which really mean the same. The Shomayim Sipur tells of Kavoid Hashem, but the word Sipur means it's an old story and well known. That's a Sipur. Agid is a loshon of Umagid Horakia. The sky is today's weather. Magid is current. And Yirotzeh Lagid Lecha Mashu is something, I want to tell you something. It's current. It's for now. The sky is now. The Shomayim is an old story. And the Malbim explains, therefore, that's why on Leil HaSeder the mitzvah is called Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's an old story. But if you sit on Leil HaSeder with your children or your grandchildren and you tell them the story, they know it. They'll probably fall asleep even before Manish Tana. You have to tell it as a Haggadah, and that's why the book is called a Haggadah and not Hasipur, because the Haggadah is key. You should tell your child. Higid Lecha, you should tell him. That's the difference between Sipur and Higid. When it comes to prayer, you need a Haggadah, and you will say, Lefoni Agid. I want to tell you, Sichi, my conversation, today's conversation. This is what I'm going through. So we see that conversation of prayer is a vital way of a mindset of prayer. Not to look at it as something which I repeat and rattle out, which I said yesterday and I said last week and I said 10 years ago. That's not the approach. The words of the Siddur are an ancient heirloom. but the way you say them, they must be said as if they're current and topical and alive for now. And that's the meaning of the word sichi and agid here. A very important aspect of prayer is the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu we're talking to him in a direct conversation, and I'm relating to him in a very clear, open, current way. He is Avinu, and I am the Eved. I am the son. He is Malkeinu, and I am the Eved. The relationship he is the Noisein, and I am the Mekabel. Therefore Hu Noisein lechem l'chol basar, and therefore I recognize that. I talk to him. He is Mechalkel Chaim b'Chesed, and I talk to him in such a way. That's the meaning behind the words agid and sicha. It's an ongoing, current, present conversation. It's an ancient text, but I make it alive and current. Pasuk Daled describes the mood that Dovid went through, which is the mood, of course, also, as we mentioned at the beginning of the Shir, of the period of Yemei Moshiach. B'hisatef olai ruchi, when I am wrapped up in my spirit. V'ato yodato nesivasi, and you know the path I'm going on. Ba'erach zu ahalech tomnu pach li, and I'm in a trap. The word atuf in Kuf Beis, Dovid Hamelech says, Tefillah lo ani ki ya'atof, means to be wrapped up, sitting down in a corner and wrapped in my robe. In other words, the difficulties, the depression, the hardship. Atuf beruchi is the difficulty which Dovid experienced, which is the hardship which Klal Yisroel experienced during the times of Yemei Moshiach. And you know, Nesivasi, my path. Let's look at Dovid first in his lifetime. This is my path. I'm not looking to make a battle, said Dovid. I'm not looking to aggravate or assassinate the king. He's looking to kill me, but I don't intend to kill him. And I'm in a trap. He was caught. He had no way out. It was a dead end for him. That's the mood of Klal Yisroel before the times of the coming of Moshiach. They are atuf, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows our path. The expression which is used in the beginning of the Shir HaMalos in Tehillim. When Klal Yisrael turn around and say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oy oli ki gati meshech shochanti im ohalei kedar. Oy vey, when I live amongst ohalei kedar, amongst Ishmaelim. I sit with people who hate peace. Ani shalom. I come to the peace conferences in Oslo, in Madrid, in the United Nations. When I talk to them, they mean war. I mean peace. They mean war. That's the meaning here when Dovid says, you know that I, Klal Yisroel, are looking for peace. I'm not looking for fighting with them, but I'm in a pach, tomnu pach li, in a trap. We mentioned in the previous shir, when we spoke about Golus Yishmael, and we learnt through Perek Kuf Daled, 124 in Tehillim, and Klal Yisrael described themselves as being nafshenu ketzipa nimlato mi pach hayoikshim. Our lives are like a bird escaping, flying away from the hunter's trap. Hapach nishbar. The trap will snap, and we will be saved. Reb Chaim Vital says in the name of the Arizal, that's the mood of Klal Yisroel in the times of Golus Yishmael. They're in a situation of a pach. You can't talk to them. There's no one to talk to. As far as they're concerned, there's nothing to talk about until every Jew is pushed into the sea. There's no negotiations with them. That's Golus Yishmael. According to the Siporno, if we understand clearly what's behind this perek of Dovid in the cave, it's Klal Yisroel and Ikvasat the Mashiach feel as if they're in a pach. They're in a trap. They're in a very difficult position when you can't talk to them. The pach is the same. A pach in perek 124 and 142. It's the same thing. It's a dead-end situation. That's the mood of Ikvasat the Mashiach, the mood of the prayer. Pasuk Hey, as a follow-through. Habeit yaminu re'ei ve'eini makir, said Dovid while in the back of the cave. I look to the right, I look around, and no one recognizes me. There's no one here for me. Ovad manais mimeni, all means of escape have fled from me. Ein dairesh lenafshi. No one's looking out for me, except maybe just Yonasan, who looked to help him. But otherwise, he was a sole, isolated fugitive from the king and all his army against Dovid. He was in a very isolated, desperate state. That's Klal Yisroel. No one looks out for Klal Yisroel. Ein doiresh lenafshi. No one's searching out, surrounded by a pack of 70 wolves, as they say, around Eretz Yisrael, and every nation is just about to spring, and that's the situation that we find ourselves before the coming of Moshiach. The mood of Dovid in the cave is the mood of Klal Yisroel in this desperate time before the Mashiach will come. That's what the Almighty has put us through. These are the stages of Chevlei Moshiach before the final Geula. As a result, Pasuk Vav. Zo'akti elecha Hashem, said Dovid in the cave, I called out to you, Hashem. Zo'oka, as we said, is a cry, a legitimate cry. Omarti, I said, Ato machsi, you are my refuge. Chalki be'eretz hachayim, my portion is in the land of life. The formula which Dovid is mentioning here in this pasuk, besides the obvious concept of zo'oka, of crying in prayer, is the word ato machsi. The Vilna Gaon in the Siddur explains that when we say the words Shema Koleinu, Chus v'rachem oleinu, there were two words. Chus is a family connection. Chus means I'm associated, I'm intimate with you. That's Klal Yisroel. We are Am Segula, we are treasured by the Almighty, we have a connection. Rachem is general, Chus is particular and intimate and personal. And therefore, when a person comes to pray in the times of Ikbus of the Mashiach, we must daven with a firm loyalty, with a devotion, with a feeling of intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Eliyahu HaNavi tried to push Klal Yisroel at Har HaKarmel, when he said to them, Im Lashem, Lashem, Im Labal, Labal. But make your mind up, where are you? Where do you stand? What's your allegiance? What's your loyalty? And that must feature as a permanent characteristic inside prayer. Ato machsi. I remember Rabbi Brevda, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, used to often bring out the importance in davening, always to stress the word ato. Ki ato shoymea tfilas amocha Yisrael. Ki kel melech vayfe ne'eman v'rachamon oto. Ato gibar. Always the word you emphasizes the direct relationship, the connection. It's me and you. I'm connecting with you. And that's the intimacy which comes out. Reb Chaim Brisker once explained that one doesn't daven with a mindset of a possibility, perhaps, and I'll try prayer, and I'll try also a good lawyer, and I'll try also protection, and I'll try everything else. No. When you say the words Ato Machsi, it's davening with a vados, with a certainty. It's you who are there. It's you who help. It's a certain style of prayer, and it's certainly a very clear, focused message behind the prayer. It's not mixed with other allegiances or other connections or devotion or themes of support. Ato machsi. It's you, and that's the way the prayer must be said. Pasuk Zayin is a further point. Hakshiva erinosi. Pay attention to my cry. Ki da'aloisi me'oid. I'm extremely poor. Hatzileni me'roidafai ki omtsu mimeni. Save me from my pursuers, for they are much stronger than me. In this pasuk, in Pasuk Zayin, Dovid Hamelech is showing us a certain feature of prayer, which is the hachnor, the submission, the humility which comes out. Ki daloisi ma'od, for I am very poor. Before we come to the main passage of prayer, which is Shemona Esrei every morning, we have a passage called Ezras. Ezras is a paragraph where we place our position, as they say, on the cards. Moitzi asirim u'faida anovim v'oizer dalim v'oine la'amoy be'es shavam elov. We call out to our Kodesh Baruch Hu, in the words of Rashi in the Gemara in Brachas, like an oni who's knocking on the door. We knock and we ask and we make a plea. That's the meaning of the word ki daloisi ma'od. We don't pray on equal terms, chas v'shona, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We put ourselves very low down, and that's the power of the hachnor, of the submission behind the prayer. When you finish davening Shemona Esrei, that's the role of tachnun afterwards. Rabbeinu Bachai brings out in Parshas Koirach that the prayer Nefilas Apayim, which is tachnun, which is said straight after Shemona Esrei, has in it three connotations. After one has stood in front of the Almighty, there is a moira for the Shechina, there is a fear having stood in front of Hashem, the tsar and the hachnor of my own lowliness and my own inadequacy, and I put my head down and close my eyes and don't talk. It's the feeling of like nullifying and closing down all senses after having spoken to him. That's the impression after prayer. And that's what Dovid is showing here. Ki daloisi ma'od. I come to you as misradze berachamim u'mispayis b'tachanunim. I ask you for rachamim. I ask for your help. That's the way Dovid prayed. That's the way Klal Yisroel is supposed to pray in the times of Ikvus of the Mashiach, the loneliness. Perhaps at this point we can digress for a minute or two and explain what exactly we're going through in Klal Yisroel during these difficult times of Ikvus of the Mashiach. In 1934, when the first edicts came out of the Third Reich, and it was clear what their intention was against Klal Yisroel, Reb Leib Chasman, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron in Yerushalayim, explained what does it mean that Klal Yisroel are put in such a difficult position, such a period of great difficulty. And he explained that the wars of Gog and Magog, the period behind the history of Chevlei Moshiach, is that we're put in a position where Al Hashem v'al Mashiachai, based in Tehillim, Gog and Magog are going against the Almighty. That's the master plan. Not necessarily against the people, but against Hashem. Al Hashem v'al Mashiachai. Asked Reb Chasman in his Mamorim, how can you fight against Hashem? And he answered that Edom, the power of America, is enormous in the assimilation to pull Klal Yisroel away from the Almighty. That's what happened in Germany, in Berlin, before the Second World War. The Haskalah movement, and the movement which pulled Klal Yisroel completely away from the Almighty. In response, said Rav Chasman, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring Klal Yisroel to a situation where there is no recourse except to turn to Him. And that's the nature of the decrees in Germany. And we see, when we look around at Iran and Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Hezbollah and ISS and all the other nations around us, there isn't any other form of salvation. There isn't anybody else. That's what the Gemara means when it says in the end of the Gemara in Soita that in the times of Ikvus of the Mashiach, all the terms of civilization and honesty and decency, Pnei Ador k'Pnei Akelev, Chutzpah Yaske, all the terms of what we always relied on in civilization will have collapsed. And all we have is just our emunah and our trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's all that's left at the end. Rabbi Yerucham asked on that Gemara, But always in the history of the Jewish nation, we always have to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Said Rabbi Yerucham, yes, but in the times before the Ikvasei de Mashiach, in the times of the Mashiach, all the other Baalei Samcha, the pillars of support, will have gone and disintegrated, and all we're left with is a man's emunah, tzaddik be'emunasa yichya. That's what Dovid is telling us here, and it's translated into prayer. Ki daloisi ma'oid, I'm in a very desperate situation. I have no other recourse. I turn to you because koili el Hashem eschanon. I don't have anything else. I don't have my support. And that was Dovid in the cave, and that's Klal Yisroel at these times. Ki daloisi ma'oid. The last pasuk is the finale to the prayer of Dovid. Hoitzia mimasger nafshi, lahoidais es shemecha. Take me out of this spiritual straitjacket, lahoidais es shemecha, that I can thank your name. Bi achtiru tzadikim, ki sigmoil oloi. On me, tzadikim will crown me because you paid me back. What is Dovid referring to here, and what formula in prayer is he referring to, which he mentioned in the cave and is the directory for Klal Yisroel before the Moshiach? Chazal explained that Hoitzia mimasker nafshi rosh tevas hey mem nun homon. It's like a cleft. It's like a trap. It's like a cell. There's no way you can go. You can't do anything here. Like the pach we mentioned. That was homon. But what's the purpose in order to be relieved? It's not that Klal Yisroel ask, take us out of this period of exile and galus so that we can all go and spend the rest of our lives in Florida or on the Swiss Alps and just sit back in a deck chair and take it easy. That's not what Dovid asked for. Lahoidais es shemecha, that I can come out of this and thank you that it's you who saved me. His intention was completely devoted and sincere. I'm not looking for an easy life. I'm looking for the means to pray to you and thank you. That's the higher level of our existence once the Moshiach comes. A complete connection. And all there'll be in the world is Mola Ha'oretz Das, Ki Mola Ha'oretz Das Elokim. That's all that there'll be. Just to be the connection with the Almighty, with Hashem. And Dovid asked that I would like to be the role model. Biyachtiru tzadikim. Let all the tzadikim see that in me I depended on you, I prayed to you, and you answered me. Ki sigmol alai. And that's the upbeat in this perek here. Dovid doesn't leave you in the desperation of his prayer. He leaves you with the lahoidais shemecha. No perek in Tehillim ends on a low. It ends on a high spiritual level. Ki sigmoil aloi. The word gemul means to pay back. Because I hoped and trusted and waited for you, you'll pay me back. Perhaps we can compare it to the laws of ribis. If you lend somebody $100, you're not allowed to ask back for any more than $100 because it's called schar hamtona, the reward for waiting, which is called ribis, which is forbidden. In financial matters, you're not allowed to take schar hamtona. But in waiting for the Moshiach, you are privileged to receive schar hamtona, reward for waiting. And that's the gemul, that's the payment. Ki sigmoil oloi. You're paying me back for my waiting for you. And that's the great pride that Dovid had in waiting for the Moshiach, that there'll be a reward, and people will live through me. These are the themes of prayer which Dovid mentioned in the cave, which are the mindset for Klal Yisroel. The direction, not without distraction, posuk base, that it should be a clear conversation which is current and topical, pasuk gimel. Pasuk daled, I'm in the pach, and there doesn't seem to be a chance for me. Pasuk Hey, there's no support system. Pasuk Vov, Ato Machsi is the connection, the allegiance, the loyalty. Pasuk Zayin, Ki Daloisi Ba'oi, the theme of poverty, of submission before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And finally, the tachlis, the purpose of it all, is in order to to thank you. That's my intention at the end. All these come under one umbrella, and that is the meaning of the word maskil leDovid. Dovid was correct in his thinking. He thought it through. He was accurate in what he was thinking. In 1918, the Chofetz Chaim had said, after the First World War, that what has just taken place is the first war of Gog and Magog. He then said that there would be a second in 25 years' time, which would make the first look like child's play. Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, Zecher Tzadik V'Rach, had gone and asked the Chofetz Chaim what he meant, and he said literally that. The second, in 25 years' time, will be devastating compared to the first. And then he said there'll be a third, but he called it an Eis Tzara LeYaakov. Umimenu Yivoshea. But from there they will be saved. His famous Talmud, Rabbi Chonon Wassman, had said on those words of the Chofetz Chaim, V'hamaskil bo'eis hazois. And the person who is a discerning person at such times, Yidoim v'yitkoinein, will be quiet and prepare. Maybe that person will see the Nechama of Yerushalayim. Rabbi Chonon, who was the most prolific of all writers about the Ikvus of the Mashiach, in his different pamphlets and articles that he wrote, he called it all a period of a maskil, a discerning person. Why did he say the word Yidom, to be quiet? Because there aren't answers. It's a time of confusion. Habeit Yamin ve'eni makir. I don't know. I'm in a pach. I don't know which way to turn. But that's why Yidom, to keep quiet v'yitkoinein, and perhaps most of all, Dovid's formula of a maskil, b'yosa b'amora tefillah, is the arousal and the enormous urgency of prayer in these times, to make the connection, to call to Him, to call directly, to call without distraction, to call with complete humility and submission. That's the nature of the prayer of Dovid in the cave, and that evidently is the formula for Klal Yisroel in the times of just before the Moshiach. We mentioned that in the Shir on Perek Kuf Kaf Daled, Ezreinu b'Shem Hashem Oisei Shamayim v'Oretz. That's our homework in this period. That's the nature of the response. That's our teguvah, our reaction and the impact of what is going on around us. Dovid asked, please, ki sigmo elolai, pay me back, and let it be seen that I waited for you and I hoped for you. Let it also be said to us, ulai, because of that, nira v'niske lirois, nechamas tziyam b'Yerushalayim, b'mheira v'yameinu, amen.
Rabbi Yohanan Alperin visits the USA and Canada several times a year, giving shiurim and lectures to various communities and schools, usually during Elul, before or after Hanukkah and Purim, and around the time of Shavuos. If there is a different time of the year that you would prefer, please let us know. We will be happy to send you information and references. Contact information for Rabbi Alperin in New York, it's 646-502-6798, or in Israel, 02-652-0864. You can also be reached at email address alperin@bezekint.net, or you can also contact Denise Simon, U.S. number 516-489-5218, or in Israel 054-662-8140. And he could also be reached at email address simon32@aol.com.